In 1972, bootleggers knew every channel in the Okefenokee Swamp by heart. But that night, something began following their route. It didn't attack, it studied, learning where they hid, how they escaped. And by the time they realized what was tracking them, it had already memorized the way out. Subscribe to the Encounter Archives. This is what happened when the swamp started watching back. The Okefenokee Swamp held different rules at night. Rules that dated older than the lumber mills or the turpentine camps or even the Seminole who'd hidden there during the wars. Water turned black as tar after sundown. Reeds reached 8 feet high and blocked the moon. A man could paddle through channels he'd known since boyhood and still get lost if he didn't watch the cypress markers just right. I ran shine through those channels for 3 years before the summer of 1972. Long enough to memorize every turn and know which creek mouths led to solid ground and which ones fed into quick mud that'd suck a boat under in minutes. My name's Dalton Webb. I was 26 that year, raised in Folkestone on the Georgia side, and I made decent money moving mason jars and gallon jugs from stills deep in the swamp to buyers who met us at old fish camps along the Florida line. The law didn't patrol those waters much. Too easy to get stuck, too many gators, too many stories about things that weren't gators. Our crew ran small and tight. There was Luther Cobb, the oldest at 43, who'd been running routes since before I was born. He had a wooden john boat with a quiet motor he'd rebuilt himself, and he knew the swamp the way some men know scripture. Ray Doucette was 31, Cajun by blood, and he handled the second boat. He'd come up from Louisiana after some trouble and stayed because the swamp felt like home. My cousin Terrell Webb was 24, wiry and quick, always humming under his breath, even when we were supposed to stay silent. And then there was me, middle boat, keeping pace and watching the rear. We worked for a man named Hackett, who ran a still operation out near Billy's Island, deep enough in the swamp that even the park rangers didn't go looking. He paid fair and didn't short us, which was rare in that trade. The route we ran started at his dock near the island, followed Minnie's Lake down into the cypress runs, then cut east through Mizell Prairie before angling south toward the state line. On a clear night with no engine trouble, we made the run in 4 hours. On a night like the one in late August when things started, it took longer. The air that night felt wrong from the start. Too still. The heat pressed down heavy even after the sun dropped, and the bugs didn't rise the way they should have. No mosquitoes swarming the lantern light, no dragonflies skimming the water. Even the frogs stayed quiet, and that was never a good sign. Frogs went silent for 2 reasons: a storm coming, or something bigger than them moving through. Luther looked at the sky before we loaded the boats. "Weather's holding," he said, but his voice carried doubt. He checked the motor twice, which he never did, and made sure the poles were lashed down tight. Ray lit a cigarette and let it burn between his fingers without smoking it. Terrell asked if we should wait a night. Luther shook his head. "Hackett's got buyers waiting. We go." We loaded the jugs careful, stacking them low in the boats to keep the weight balanced. Each boat carried 40 gallons, enough to make the trip worth the risk, but not so much we'd sink if we hit a stump. Luther went first as always, his motor humming low and steady. I followed 30 yards back. Ray brought up the rear with Terrell riding along to help navigate. The water looked like oil in the last light, smooth and black and reflecting nothing. We made good time through Minnie's Lake. The channel markers stood right where they always did. Old posts driven into the mud years back, some with reflective tape that caught our shaded lamp if you knew where to look. The cypress rose on both sides, trunks thick as grain silos, roots twisting up through the water like bent fingers. Spanish moss hung so low in places we had to duck. The smell was familiar. Rotted wood, swamp gas, wet bark, and underneath it all something green and alive that you couldn't name but recognized. An hour in, Luther's motor coughed once and went quiet. He raised a hand, and we cut ours too. The silence came down, immediate and total. No frogs, no crickets, no owls. Just water lapping soft against the hulls, and the faint creak of wood under our weight. Luther leaned over the motor and checked the fuel line. I drifted closer, letting the current carry me. "What is it?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. He pulled the starter cord twice, and the motor turned over weak, sputtered, and died again. "Fuel's good," he said finally. "Spark plug, maybe." He pulled a rag from his pocket and wiped his hands. "Give me 5 minutes." Ray paddled up beside me, careful not to make noise. Terrell sat rigid in the bow, head turning slow like he was listening for something. The water around us stayed smooth. No ripples, no fish rising, nothing moving at all. Then we heard it. A long scraping sound from somewhere south of us, metal on wood, deliberate and slow. It stopped. Started again. Stopped. Luther froze with a spark plug halfway out. We all looked in the same direction, but saw only dark and the outline of reeds. The sound came a third time, closer now, and with it a smell that cut through the swamp stink. Sharp, chemical, wrong. Like diesel mixed with something spoiled. "What's that?" Terrell asked, voice barely a breath. Ray shook his head. Luther's jaw tightened and he worked faster, threading the plug back in and tightening it by hand. The scraping stopped. The smell lingered. I reached under the seat and felt for the tire iron I kept there, cold and solid. My heart kicked harder than it should have. Luther yanked the starter cord. The motor caught on the first pull, louder than I wanted it to be. "Move," he said. We followed him into the channel without a word. Behind us, something heavy slid into the water. Not a gator. Gators don't make the water pull back like that. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of Mazel Prairie, where the trees opened up and the water spread wide and shallow across sawgrass flats. Luther cut his motor and let the boat drift into a stand of reeds near a hammock of high ground. We pulled in close and tied off to the same cypress knees. Nobody spoke for a full minute. The air had cooled some, but still felt thick, hard to pull into the lungs. Ray lit another cigarette, hands steady this time, and took a long drag. "That wasn't nothing natural," he said quiet. Luther nodded once. Terrell looked back the way we'd come, eyes wide and jaws set. I wiped sweat off my neck and checked the jug straps. Everything was still lashed down tight. "Could have been a stump," I said, not believing it. "Or somebody's old boat breaking loose." "Stumps don't move upstream," Luther said. He pulled a thermos from under his seat and unscrewed the cap. The coffee inside had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. And that smell wasn't rot. That was something else. Terrell shifted his weight and the boat rocked slight. "My granddad used to talk about things in the deep swamp," he said. "Things that'd follow the shine runners back in the 20s. He said they didn't bother you if you kept moving and didn't look back. But if your engine quit or you got stuck, they'd circle until you made a mistake. Your granddad also said he saw a panther big as a truck," Ray said, and that was after he'd been drinking his own product. But his voice held no humor. We all knew the stories. Every man who'd worked these waters had heard them. Tall shapes seen at dawn near Billy's Island. Boats found drifting empty with the motors still running. A fire tower on the east side of the swamp torn down in one night. The metal bent like it was paper. Rangers blamed storms or vandals, but the old-timers knew better. Luther capped the thermos. "We got 2 hours to the drop point," he said. "We stay in open water where we can see. No shortcuts through the cypress runs. We keep the motors running even if we have to burn extra fuel. And if something follows, we don't stop to look at it. We get to the camp, we unload, and we're done for the season." "For the season?" I asked. Luther met my eyes. "I'm too old to be out here when things go sideways," he said. "This run feels wrong. You boys want to keep working for Hackett after tonight? That's your business. I'm finished." We pushed off 10 minutes later. The prairie stretched wide under a half moon that gave just enough light to see the grass tops and the dark gaps where the channels ran. We followed the main cut east, motors low and steady. The water here ran only 2 feet deep in most places, easy to get grounded if you didn't know where the soft mud lay. I watched Luther's wake and matched it exact. "Halfway across the prairie," Ray called out soft. We slowed and turned. He pointed north toward a line of dead cypress that marked an old creek bed. Something stood there among the trunks, tall and still, silhouette sharp against the gray wood. It didn't move, didn't sway, just watched. The distance was too far to make out details, but the shape was wrong. Too narrow through the body, arms too long. "Keep going," Luther said. We did. I didn't look back, but Terrell did. He made a sound low in his throat and turned around fast. "It stepped into the water," he whispered. "It's following." Luther opened the throttle wider than he should have in the shallows. We matched him, the motors rising to a growl that echoed flat across the prairie. The boat skimmed over the grass tops, hulls scraping bottom in places, but not catching. Behind us, the sound of something moving through water came steady and smooth. No splashing, no thrashing, just a wake that pushed through the reeds in a straight line toward us. We hit the far side of the prairie where the trees closed in again and the water deepened. Luther slowed and turned south into a channel I didn't recognize. "This ain't the route," Ray called. "I know," Luther said, "but it's faster." The channel narrowed quick, trees leaning over from both sides, branches scraping the boat tops. Roots jutted up from the bottom, and we had to weave between them. The motors whined in the tight space. A half-mile in, Luther stopped so sudden I nearly rammed him. He pointed ahead. Blocking the channel was an old cabin built on pilings, half collapsed into the water. The roof sagged and the walls leaned bad, but the structure still stood. I'd never seen it before, and I'd thought I knew every abandoned building in this part of the swamp. "That wasn't here last month," Luther said. We drifted closer. The cabin door hung open, and the windows were dark gaps that showed nothing inside. The pilings underneath were wrapped with something that looked like wire or chain, rusted dark and trailing into the water. A fuel pump sat on the narrow dock, the old hand-crank kind they stopped using in the 40s. The hose was torn off, and the casing dented deep, like something had grabbed it and crushed the metal. Terrell whispered a prayer under his breath. Ray pulled a flashlight from his pack and aimed it at the cabin. The beam caught the doorway and reflected off something inside. Eyes, low to the floor, too wide set for a raccoon, too high for a possum. They blinked once, and withdrew into the dark. The boards under the cabin creaked. Then we heard it. 3 heavy knocks from inside the structure, evenly spaced, like someone testing the walls. "Back up," Luther said. We reversed the boats careful, not turning around, keeping the cabin in front of us. The knocking came again, louder, and the door swung shut on its own despite no wind. The pilings shuddered. Water around the foundation began to churn, bubbles rising fast like something underneath was breathing out. The smell hit us again. Diesel, rot, and something sour that made my eyes water. Luther turned the boat and gunned the motor. We followed him back the way we'd come, not caring about the noise now, just wanting distance. The channel behind us stayed dark. The cabin disappeared around a bend. We didn't slow until we hit open water again and could see the horizon. When we stopped to catch our breath, I noticed something I hadn't before. 3-toed tracks in the mud along the bank, each one a foot long and sunk deep like whatever made them carried serious weight. We reached the drop point an hour before dawn, nerves shot and fuel running low. The old fish camp sat on a shell mound at the edge of the swamp, where the water turned brackish and you could smell salt on the wind. A single building stood there, concrete block with a tin roof and no windows. 2 trucks waited in the clearing, headlights off. Hackett's buyers. They didn't ask questions, and we didn't offer explanations. We unloaded fast, passing the jugs up to men who stacked them in the truck beds without counting. Luther took the cash from the lead buyer, a thick man in overalls who smelled like cigarettes and fish. "Y'all look spooked," the man said. Luther folded the bills and put them in his shirt pocket. "Long night," he said. Nothing more. The man nodded like he understood and climbed into his truck. Both vehicles pulled out slow, taillights fading into the pines. We sat on the dock afterward, too tired to start the trip back right away. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky had gone from black to deep blue. Birds started calling from the trees. Herons, egrets, a mockingbird running through its repertoire. Normal sounds. The kind that made the night we'd just had feel like something we'd imagined. Ray smoked and stared at the water. Terrell cleaned mud off his boots with a stick. Luther counted the money again and divided it into 4 equal stacks. He handed each of us our share without looking up. "That's it for me," he said. "I meant what I said earlier. I'm done running this route." "It's good money," Ray said, but his voice held no conviction. Luther shook his head. "Not worth it. Something's changed out there. I don't know what, and I don't care to find out. You boys want to keep going, that's your business. But I'm selling my boat and finding work on land." Terrell folded his bills and put them in his wallet. "What do you think it was?" he asked. "The thing following us?" Luther was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My daddy worked for the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 30s. They built trails and towers in the swamp. He told me they lost 3 men one summer, all in different spots, all found the same way. Gear scattered, boats empty, no blood or signs of a fight. Just gone. The crew that found the last one said they saw tracks around the boat. 3 toes, big as a man's hand. The CCC shut down that section of the swamp and never went back." "You think that's what we saw?" I asked. Luther looked at me. "I think the swamp's got things in it that know how to wait. And I think we got lucky tonight because we kept moving. But luck runs out." We rested another hour, so then started the trip back. The sun came up clean and bright, burning off the mist and turning the water from black to brown. In daylight, the swamp looked almost friendly. cypress draped with moss, lily pads floating in the channels, turtles sunning on logs. We followed the main routes, staying to the marked channels, and saw nothing unusual. By mid-morning, we reached Hackett's dock near Billy's Island. He was waiting for us, leaning against a piling with a coffee mug in his hand. Hackett was 60-some years old, lean and weathered, with scars on his forearms from years of handling copper stills and hot mash. He watched us tie off the boats and didn't say anything until we'd climbed onto the dock. "Buyers called," he said. "Said you looked like you'd seen a ghost." Luther handed him the receipt and the remainder of the cash. "We won't be running for you anymore," he said. Hackett's eyebrows went up. "All of you?" We nodded. He sipped his coffee and studied us. "Must have been a bad night." "Bad enough," Ray said. Hackett looked past us at the swamp. "You see something out there?" "We saw enough," Luther said. "Something's moving through the channels, something that follows boats. We got close to it twice, and I don't plan to make it 3. Hackett nodded slow. "I've been hearing things," he said. "Other runners talking. Couple weeks back, a crew from the Florida side said they found a boat grounded near Suwannee Canal. Motor torn clean off the transom. Fuel tank punctured. No sign of whoever had been driving it." "Rangers find them?" Terrell asked. Hackett shook his head. "Didn't report it. You don't report things out here unless you want questions you can't answer. But word spreads. And now I'm hearing about other stuff. A fire tower on the east side knocked down. Vehicles found with the doors ripped off. Tracks showing up in places people don't go." "What kind of tracks?" I asked, knowing the answer. Hackett set his mug down. 3-toed, big ones, and they're always near water. He paused. Old-timers got a name for what makes them. They call it the swamp ape, skunk ape. Different names depending on who you ask. Stories go back 100 years or more. Most people think it's just talk, something to scare tourists. But the folks who work out here, the ones who spend real time in the deep swamp, they know better. "You ever see it?" Ray asked. Hackett looked at him. "Once, 20 years back. I was running traps near Chase Prairie at dawn. Saw something standing in the shallows about 50 yards off. Tall, maybe 7 feet, covered in dark hair. It was bent over like it was drinking or looking for something. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds before it turned its head and looked right at me. Eyes caught the light. Then it stood up straight and walked into the reeds without making a sound. I left my traps and never went back to that spot." We stood there in silence for a while. Finally, Luther said, "You might want to shut down the operation for a bit. Let things settle." Hackett nodded. "I'm thinking the same. Ain't worth getting somebody killed over shine." He looked at each of us in turn. "Y'all did good work. I appreciate it. If you need a reference for other jobs, you got it." We shook hands and left. Luther sold his boat that afternoon to a fisherman from Waycross. Ray packed up his things and headed back to Louisiana within a week. Terrell found work at a lumber yard in Folkestone. I stayed around town, picking up construction jobs and trying not to think about that night. But the swamp has a way of staying with you. Even now, 50 years later, I can still smell that diesel rot stench and hear the scraping sound of something heavy dragging across wood. A few months after we quit, I heard from a friend who worked with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. He said rangers found the old cabin we'd seen, the one that wasn't supposed to be there. It had been torn apart from the inside. The walls were clawed through, The pilings snapped at the base. The whole structure collapsed into the water. They couldn't explain it. Around the wreckage, they found tracks, three-toed, deep, leading off into the swamp and then disappearing in the shallows. The official report called it storm damage. But storms don't leave claw marks 4 inches deep in treated timber. And storms don't stack fuel pumps on the bank like someone was testing how they worked. The rangers closed that section of the swamp to boat traffic. They said it was for safety, but I knew better. They'd seen what we'd seen. They just couldn't admit it. I never went back into the Okefenokee. Luther died in 1989 from lung cancer. Ray, last I heard, was still alive down in Houma, working on oil rigs. Terrell moved to Atlanta and we lost touch. But every so often, I'll see a news story about strange sightings in the swamp. Hikers reporting a tall figure watching them from the tree line, fishermen finding their boats tampered with overnight, unexplained sounds recorded on trail cameras. The scientists say it's bears or people in costumes, but the locals know different. The thing we ran from that night in 1972 is still out there. It's patient, it's smart, and it's learned over the years how to move through that swamp without being seen. The old-timers were right. There are things in the deep water that know how to wait. And if you're unlucky enough to run into one on a night when the frogs go quiet, you'd better keep your engine running and your eyes forward. Because the moment you stop, the moment you look back, that's when it knows you've seen it. And once it knows that, it remembers. I live in Waycross now, 40 miles from the swamp's edge. Far enough that I can't smell the water. Close enough that on still nights, when the wind drops and the world goes quiet, I swear I can hear something out there in the dark. A scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like something testing the distance, learning the route, waiting for the right time to follow it all the way to my door.